Dr. Jackie, you have a PhD in gamification. What is that?
So gamification, it's one of those things where there's equal representation across both academia and industry. And I guess depending on where a person falls on that spectrum, what you ask them, they'll give you a different answer. So from my perspective and how I use gamification, it's the use of game elements in a non-game context. And my area of interest or my background is in behavior change. And one of the things that we see is it's really difficult to help people change their behavior. So like getting into physical activity, eating healthily, maybe stopping something like if you want to stop smoking, it's really difficult. And one of the ways that we can help people to fix that is through gamification. So it's using the fun, motivational elements that we see in games and transitioning it into a non-game space. And it's so my perspective is a bit more on the academic side because of my PhD background. If you ask people who are purely in industry, they might tend a bit more to like pure games that are used, or like gamified learning, where it's a game that you learn things. And all of that falls under the gamification banner. It's one of the things that I love about the field is there are so many layers and nuances to it. It's also why whenever someone asks me about gamification, I'm very clear to give like my definition of it so that we're on the same page. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. So use elements of games because that's what gets
Mm.
us hooked on games, right? It's like
Yeah.
if we think about um, the one that comes to mind is the for a while, Angry Birds was a big one. Um,
Yes.
And then I never played Angry Birds, but I did play Candy Crush. And
Yes.
it was so addicting because you would
Yeah.
play like one round and you're like, "Ooh, I
Yeah.
want to get to the next round. I want to get," and and you don't know that you don't realize how quickly time passes when
Yeah.
your mind is in a gamified, they're using gamification on you. And so using that for behavioral change. So in which industry do you use your skills in gamification, and how are you using that to what behaviors are you potentially changing?
So I'm in the health and wellness industry.
Right.
The company that I work for, we support a health and life insurance product.
Right.
So the thinking behind it is if you help people to engage in healthy behaviors, you reduce their risk. And by reducing their risk, you reduce their claims. And that's good for the insurer. It's good for the people. It generates surplus, which we can then feed back into the program to reward people. And where we've used gamification quite extensively is predominantly in physical activity. Because physical activity is one of those, it's fairly easy to incentivize, because it's a very measurable behavior.
Yeah.
You can very easily give people recommendations around, walking more, going to the gym, going for a run. There's a lot of recommendations that you can give people, and within the recommendations you can measure it, and then because it's so measurable you can reward it. And what we've seen, and there's quite a bit of research outside of just what we've seen, but physical activity is one of those behaviors that if people start exercising, it just kickstarts a whole bunch of other good behaviors. And so we predominantly gamify physical activity, and we're starting to look at other ways that we can bring gamification in. But one of the reasons why, and this is not just within our space, it's gamification in general, and you alluded to it, is it's so successful because it gives you that instant reward.
Yeah.
So like something like health behavior change, it's tricky because you're doing good things to benefit future you. So you're asking current you to go for a run so that you from 5, 10, 15 years from now can have good, cardiorespiratory fitness and good risk. And that's hard. Putting yourself in future use shoes is difficult. Whereas if you bring in that game element and say, you know what, go for this run, and you're going to earn a badge. And when you've earned 5 badges, you get a really cool reward. People are like, oh, let's do this. Let's track my run. I want that badge. I want the virtual confetti. So you're still getting the long-term benefits, but you're also introducing that immediate, instant gratification.
Yeah. No, that's so helpful in having you explain that. So you're working in the health and wellness industry, using this to help people build good habits, so that it ultimately also benefits the company, monetary wise, and some of that money, like you said, I like that. So some of that money can go back to the people. The reason I'm saying this is because I've personally had problems with insurance companies. And like recently there's been a lot of news in the US, especially with, unfortunate killing of a health insurance executive that has, kind of made people have always been sort of angry at insurance companies, but it really brought out that sentiment. And so it was kind of reassuring to hear that at least in some sector, this goes back to the people. It's really important. So thank you for sharing that. Did you always want to do what you're doing?
No, so my career's changed a lot over the years.
Yeah,
So when I started studying, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I
yeah.
just knew I was really good at maths.
Mhm.
So I studied applied maths. And I was like, it'll figure itself out. Like if you're good with numbers, you'll find a career somewhere.
Yeah,
Um, and then I kind of studied and I did my master's, and I was like, I actually really enjoy working with students. Let's
yeah.
see if I can get a lecturing position.
Mm,
But then because of how, at the time, there were two master's students, myself, and then another guy who he finished 6 months before me. So because he was just a little bit ahead of me, he got the lecturing position. Um, and then while I was looking for other lecturing positions, deciding what to do, deciding if I should do my PhD, I got a job at the company where I'm at the moment. But I was in a very analytical team, pure, stats, doing background modeling, things like that. And then in 2015, I got into my current team. They did a company wide, like a little email blast saying, they're starting a new division. Anyone who's interested in problem solving, using different ways of doing research, alternative, projects. If you're interested, come chat to them. And I was like, that sounds really interesting, because I've always, and I think it's why, I studied maths to begin with, because I've always liked the idea of solving problems, and taking like a really complicated, problem and unpicking it and finding a solution. So I was like, that sounds completely, up my alley. And when I joined them, I was exposed to the world of behavioral science. Like it's not something that I'd ever really engaged with. But because of the team and doing all the research and thinking how we can, like the problem we want to solve was how can we make people healthier? I realized that there's so much out there from a behavioral science perspective. It's something that I can use, like my analytic background strengthens, the work, but there's like a whole new almost psychology behind it. And that's how, I got onto the path of behavior science and gamification. And then 2019, I'd been playing with the idea of doing a PhD for a while. I just couldn't, I needed to figure out my why. And in 2019, I was ready. I was ready to commit to the project, commit to the work. And I'd always wanted to do a PhD because I wanted to almost like finish the collection. See, gamification is completely. I've gamified my life. Like I've got
your
my
life.
full. Yeah, I've like collected the full set of trophies.
Mhm.
But I needed to find the right field. And I'm so grateful that I came into this role into this behavioral science role, because it taught me about gamification, and it also helped me to see the research, helped me to see where the gaps are. As I mentioned at the beginning, there's almost a disparity between industry and academia, and understanding both sides of the coin helped me put together a really cohesive research problem. And it's, even though the PhD was, it's obviously an academic thing, I approached it from the industry lens to make sure that it was practical, and that the output was something that hopefully someone can use one day.
Yeah.
So no, my original path was not at all where I am now. But it's been a fun ride, and I'm quite excited to see where it goes.
Absolutely. So you started out with maths and stats, joined the
Yeah.
company, got into behavioral science, then was like, this is interesting. And then when at the right time, I really like that you said that at the right time you went into a PhD. The reason I want to dwell on that a little bit is because a lot, at least in my life, I don't know about everybody else, but in my life, school always felt like, oh, what's the next step? Right.
Yeah.
I didn't really think it through. And I think for a lot of people, this may also be true, where you're like, what's the next step? I'm done with a bachelor's degree. Okay, let's go get a master's. Okay, let's go get a PhD. And sometimes we're doing that because maybe a lot of people have told us that we're smart and we should pursue that path, but we haven't actually sat down and assessed for ourselves, is this a path I really want to pursue? And how is it going to pay off in the long run? Yesterday, I was at work, we had a career panel for a group of students. And as I was chatting, as I was asking the different panelists questions, the thing that dawned on me was, first of all, nobody is doing what they thought they would be doing when they were in high school. That was the first thing. Like just 100%, nobody was doing what they thought they would ever do. And then the second thing is that at some point in their lives, they had to stop following the path everybody had told them to go on and decide for themselves, is this actually the path I want? Or is this the path I've been told I should pursue? And if I pursue the path, and there's nothing wrong with either, right? Like sometimes we need guidance. Like I'm very, very grateful to my parents for guiding me throughout my educational journey. But I think at some point you have to sit down and say, how does this really benefit my life? Is this going to, even going through a PhD for me, in hindsight, it's now, I think of it as, even though I'm very grateful I have my PhD, it was also almost a decade of me under earning, which, so you were going to say something.
No, I agree completely. And I think I was on a very similar, I was on that academic path. It's like you've got your bachelor's, you've got your honors, you've got your master's. And I registered. So I registered for a PhD in 2012, and I got a year into it. And then at the end of the year, I realized that this was not a topic that I was passionate about.
Right.
And I was like, before I, it's one of those, I think people often fall prey to the sunk cost fallacy. Like I've already put a year into this, I have to finish it. And I realized that, I will pick up the PhD conversation at some point, but not this point, like
Yeah.
not today.
Today. Every other Friday, I send out an email newsletter to about 3,000 PhDs and academics on tips, tools, and resources that you can use to build a career you love. And I'm inviting you to join us. You can go to theboldphd.com/careers list. Again, that's theboldphd.com/careers list. Let's get back into the episode. And then that ended up coming up 7 years later when it was
Exactly.
right. You mentioned the sunk cost fallacy. For somebody that's never heard that, what is it?
Oh, okay. So it's something that we come across in behavioral science where so it's a cognitive bias where if a person's invested a lot of time, effort, or money into something, even if it's not the right thing to do anymore, they'll persevere to the end because they don't want to lose the progress that they've made or the investment that they've made. And I think with something like time, if you put 2 years, 3 years, 5 years into a project, it's very easy to say that if if you don't progress, that'll all have been wasted. Whereas in reality, it's a bigger waste to carry on with something that you're not passionate about. Um, there's a something that my I think my granddad always used to say. It's like, you don't throw good money after bad. Like, just because you've invested like if you've made a bad investment, don't keep throwing money into it hoping they'll get better. Just stop investing. And it's the
Yeah.
same with time. It's the same with efforts. You kind of have to sometimes be very honest with yourself, whether or not something is worth pursuing. I think that's kind of where I was in 2012, 2013, where if I'd carried on, it would have put my career on a completely different trajectory. I don't even want to think where I would have ended up.
So this is great, right? That we're talking about sunk cost fallacy and all this. One of the challenges, right? And actually, a question sort of like this came up yesterday when I was leading the panel. Somebody asked, "I don't want to, um, I don't want to waste my time. I don't want to." First of all, the person's pretty young. And they were like, "I don't want to reach 30 and feel like and I'm like, first of all, 30 is not that old. Okay. As a 40 plus woman, 30 is not that old." And so I was, but the question was it was a really good question. Like, what frameworks do you look through to decide that, okay, I should move on from this now? Because sometimes I think that's the challenge, right? I had never heard that. I had heard about the sunk cost fallacy, but never thought of it as a cognitive bias. But now that you say, I'm like, yeah, it is. Um, but what frameworks can you use to overcome that? In your expert's opinion?
I think it's and coming from my way of thinking is it comes down to awareness.
Hmm.
So I think there are a lot of, and that's always the thing with behavioral science, and with these cognitive biases is I always laugh. You see so many posts on LinkedIn like, be aware, like, beware, there's cognitive biases. Like, marketers are going to trick you. Or marketers use this stuff to trick people. And for me, it's more about being aware that these biases exist. So something like with Suncost, and you mentioned earlier, is if you're on a path, you sometimes need to stop and take stock of where you are. And you need to decide, am I doing this? Am I on this path because everyone's told me I must be on this path and I've put so much time and effort into it? And if I don't finish, something bad is going to happen. Or am I on this path because I genuinely believe in where it's going to end? And then you kind of, and it comes down to, if people using, if a coffee company is using a bias to encourage you to buy like the bigger coffee, you have to stand and decide, am I really buying the bigger coffee because I want to, or do I actually want a small coffee? And then you buy the small coffee. So it's the same, like with all of these biases, and all of these, behavioral science tips and tricks. I think it comes down to, so as a individual, as a consumer, it's knowing that these things exist and making sure that you're making decisions that are right for you. And then from an industry perspective, it's always useful to understand how people think. And then how can we leverage that to help people make good decisions, or, whatever your business or your product is. And I think that's the reality is cognitive biases exist. That's how humans function. That's how we are
Yeah,
able to make decisions quickly. And it's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It's just a
exactly.
thing.
It's
Yeah.
just a thing. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I almost said, yeah, it's not having a particular cognitive bias is not always a bad thing. Sometimes it actually is protecting you, right? So thank you for that. I like that we went down that rabbit hole. So be aware, right? Be aware of whether this is what you really want to do, or not, because then 10 years go by, and then, okay, 10 years have gone by, and maybe now you're in a different decade of your life. Likely you're in a different decade of your life. It kind of hurts to look back and say, I wasted my time. So it's better for you to start thinking about it now. um
And I guess the reality is no experience is ever wasted.
right.
Because it
There's
gets
also
you
that.
to like it gets you to where you are. And even
Mm,
if the experience wasn't necessarily good, it taught you something about yourself.
yeah.
I had I spoke to a 17-year-old over earlier in the week, and she was
Hmm.
also she needed to decide what she wants to study. And the school organized a week for them where they could go and job shadow different industries. And she was so stressed because she's like, what if she makes the wrong decision? And, what if the experience isn't right? And I was like, you can never, it's never too late to change your direction. But everything that you do is adding to your experience, and teaching you something. Even if that something is, I didn't like that, I'm going to do something different.
That is so good. That is so good. I was listening to a podcast earlier this week, and I think one of the things that the person was saying was the benefit of work is not always money. I mean, money is really important. It's one of the most important things, but the benefit of work is actually the skills and experiences you gain, because those are skills and experiences nobody can take away from you, right? Nobody can break your head open and take them away. And so the really cool thing, I remember talking with he's a professor now, but he had started out wanting to be a music producer, right? And so he had gone to college to learn music production and all of these things, and then at some point he decides to switch all over, like, into education. But
Mm.
then he said something so profound that actually his experience as a professor is richer because he did the music production, because he can bring something new to the experience that somebody that has done education their whole lives cannot bring, right? Because he has a different creative side of him that he stopped, but he has all those skills, and so he can potentially bring that into the classroom and enrich the experiences of his students' lives. And I was like, oh, how amazing is that, right? So yeah,
I love that so much.
yeah, you're absolutely right that it's something it's an answer I wish I had given yesterday on that panel, that no experience really is wasted. So
Totally.
yeah, so moving on, let's talk about, you had gotten your job right after your master's. One of the things I like to like explore with people is how they got the job that they have. Just because for a lot of people that are currently in school or be finishing up a master's or PhD, and don't want to necessarily work in academia, because academia is fairly like there's a step by step process to go through. But if you don't want to work in academia per se, did you tap into a network? How did you find out about the job? Did you use, like, do an internship? So how did you find? I know you did it after your master's, but how did you find that job?
I found it through a close family friend.
Mm,
So what happened was, I went through a recruiting agency, and I sent out my CV broadly, went for interviews. And one day I can't remember how many interviews I'd done. Um, I was on the phone with someone, and I said, I honestly don't think I'm ever going to get a job. I don't know what I'm
mm,
going to do. And this person I was on the phone with actually had someone next to them. And afterwards, they asked her, who was that? What's going on? Can they help? And this person said, it's Jackie. She's just finished her master's. She's struggling to find a job. And our family friend said, send me her CV. I'll have a look. I'll see in the business if there's a role. We'll make a plan. Sent him my CV, and they lined up 2 interviews for me in the company. And what was really interesting is, I think the problem that I struggled with, or in hindsight, the recruiters didn't know what box to put me in. So they weren't quite pitching me for the right positions. And because I hadn't thought about what I wanted to do, I wasn't very clear on where I fit in either. And I think I think people who study very fixed professions have a very easy starting point, because if you study law, you go and you become a lawyer. If you study chartered accounting, you become a chartered accountant. Whereas if you studied applied maths, people don't always necessarily know what to do with your skills. and they don't necessarily know where to fit in. So I was very lucky that one of the people that I did the interview with, he actually said to me when he hired me, he's like, I'm still not sure what you do. And I'm still not sure what your master's was in, but it sounded very interesting. Let's see what you can do. So it was a combination of knowing someone who could connect me with networks and having a hiring manager who was willing to take the risk on an unknown entity. Now I would know how to position myself better. I know how to advocate for my skills better. And I kind of, I think it's something that I so value from your LinkedIn posts is you help explain to people how to reposition their skills into a way that hiring managers can sort of know how to place people, because I don't think people don't always know how to advocate for themselves, and they don't know how to like almost sell themselves for a role.
Yeah.
So I was very lucky that someone took a chance on a young 25-year-old with no work experience and a master's that sounded like science fiction.
Yeah.
Um,
I hope more people, I wish more people did that. I'm very much for advocating for yourself and selling your skills for sure. But sometimes people don't even know, until I started doing this. um Even I didn't know, right? Like I didn't know this, like, let's say in 2018. As recent as 2018, I didn't know how to do this, right? I didn't know. I just thought, well, I have a PhD, that has to be impressive, right? That has to be impressive enough for people to say, "Oh, let's hire her." And it took me quite a bit of time to learn that no, they're not really impressed with the degrees, especially now. I feel like the days of people being impressed by degrees have passed. In some ways, I feel, at least in the US. I don't know about everywhere else, but like that's not. I don't know. Is that true in South Africa too? Would you say?
Hey, did you know that I speak to and train groups at universities, colleges, and professional organizations on the topics I cover on this channel? I do. So if your group would like to bring me in virtually or in person to cover intentional career design, personal branding that builds your career, careers within scientific communications or biotech, go to theboldphd.com/speaking.
I think from an industry perspective, it is somewhat true. But where I've found it very beneficial is it does, people think you're interesting and then they invite you to do things.
Got it.
So
Got
they'll
it.
invite you to conferences or invite you to speak on panels, or, don't you want to meet with this person who's interested? So from an industry and career perspective, I'm inclined to agree with you. But it's definitely given me the opportunity to meet very interesting people, which I not necessarily would have had if I didn't have the title. And I guess in South Africa, it's between the PhDs and the MBAs. Those two sound like they feel very impressive, even if people don't really know what you did. They like seeing the letters behind your name.
Yeah. Okay. I see where you're coming from. I think what I think I let me rephrase what I meant by what I said. I think that when it comes to I agree with you. When it comes to academic jobs, the kind of degree you have, or yeah, the kind of degrees you have is important, right? Because they want to make sure that you can teach the students and you can do the research that you say you can do. I think that what I was trying to say was, from an industry perspective, I have scientists on, as I work in the biotech industry, and there are scientists on my team who have a bachelor's degree, right? And a PhD could be hired into that same role as that bachelor's degree person, and it doesn't matter, right? Or you could literally be a PhD who has a manager who never has doesn't even have a graduate degree. So in that sense, I was like, oh, I guess it really comes down to who has more experience, not necessarily who has the more impressive degree. So I think that's where I was going with that one, which is why if you have the impressive degree, you have to also know how to sell yourself, because you really do have some advantages, and you should highlight them. And one of the things I realized, which is why I started the board PhD and everything, was a lot of academics, either they would do one of two things. They would either downplay their skills, like really dial them down, because I feel in academia sometimes you get torn down quite a bit and then built back up. So, but unfortunately, a lot of us stay in the torn down stage for a little bit. Um, and so we tend to downplay them. Then the second one would be we would talk at a really granular level of our research, and the other person is like, okay, everything you said was impressive, but I didn't understand a word, and I don't know how it's going to help me with my business goals, right? And so really having academics think about their skills in the way that the other person may be thinking about their skills, and then also not downplaying the experiences, because we would like, if you use a particular software for 5 years, why aren't you talking about that? Especially since the job description says you should know how to use this software, right? And you use it for 5 years. That's half a decade. That's more than, Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours. So
Uh,
anyway, that
yeah,
how
no,
would
no,
they?
that's so true.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's so
No,
true.
and one of the
No,
questions
I
I was
think
going to ask you. Oh, you go ahead.
there's a bit of a lag. I think
Yeah.
in industry, or my experience has been people think coming from academia, you're not going to be practical enough. People think you're too academically focused, or you're too. I think I get the impression they're often concerned that you are not plugged into the industry enough, which isn't the case. Having a very strong academic background and being good at research means that you know how to evaluate risks. You know how to look at things strategically. And I think it's I like how you put it is PhDs need to learn how to translate their skills into a way that the other person resonates with it. So instead of saying, I did a field experiment that spanned over 3 months, and then they're going like, oh, no, this is too academic for me. You can say, I did it was a multidisciplinary project where you ran it from start to finish. Like you kind of, you upplay your project management abilities, and you downplay almost and I think that's one of the things that I enjoy having spanned academia and industry is I know how to switch between the two, which I think is a skill that people don't realize how valuable it is. Um, it's very valuable.
It is valuable. That's so helpful. Thank you, Dr. Jackie. This has been such a good conversation. So, for somebody that wants to do something similar to what you're doing in 2025, I know even though you're in South Africa, this is a type of job I've heard other people have in different parts of the world. So, for somebody that may want to get into the kind of career path you have, what advice would you give them?
So I think it is largely dependent on where the person is situated. So like in South Africa, we have people who work in behavioral science, but a lot of people come at more from an industry perspective. So you come at it from like my perspective where you find a team or a company that does that type of work, and you gain experience and you slog away at it. Maybe it's adding, a psychology degree, or you could add the academic layer, but it's not as essential. Whereas overseas, like in the UK, it is so lovely to see how behavioral science programs have just expanded. So like there's the London School of Economics where you can do a master's in behavioral science. And I think especially if you are interested in behavioral science and you want to if you want to go into gamification, go into the industry, a course like that really sets you up. Internationally, it's almost become like a profession where you can study for it and then there's a path for you. But coming from like a South Africa where we're not as established yet, it's not as an established market. If you read broadly, you engage with online content, you engage with like Udemy courses. It's one of those because it's such a practical field, and I think at the end of the day, we all know about human behavior because we are humans. Like it's putting
Yeah.
yourself in, like the it's putting yourself in someone else's shoes and thinking, why does this make sense? So it's one of those fields where if you are really passionate about it, you can upskill yourself really easily. And it's about advocating, like showing that you have the skills, and plugging away at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of self-education, also a lot of seeking out some of the programs that are out there. This is such a good conversation. Where can people find you?
So I am on LinkedIn, and I very recently started a Substack. So you can read my writings across both platforms. But I want to, within the next 6 months, I want to get a web page up and running, where
Yeah.
I can bring all the things together.
Yeah. I'll make sure to include your LinkedIn and your Substack in the show notes. So thank you so much, Dr. Jackie Noki.